Hello friends, thanks for tuning into this week's marketing video. Today I'm going to talk about delivering on your verbal contracts. And you might say, well, what is a verbal contract? A verbal contract is anything you say in the process of selling your services, when you're talking to a prospect, when you're meeting somebody for coffee, when you're having an ongoing meeting with a current client, and you say that you're going to do something. A lot of times you'll say, or if you're presenting, a lot of times you'll say, hey, I'm going to cover these three things. Or, hey, I'm going to send this email after our meeting. Whatever those verbal contracts are, it is incredibly important to fulfill those verbal contracts because it gives people this sense of confidence that you're going to deliver and that you're dependable. So you know that I love getting these ideas from real life situations. So here's a quick story about what happened to me recently. My good friend, Mike Jones at the Jones, previously of the Jones Law Firm, he's traveling quite a bit now, but we're still in a peer advisory group. I was presenting to a breakfast group of guys, very important meeting for me, a bunch of really good guys that some of which I've done business with in the past. And I was talking about LinkedIn. I was doing some training for them about LinkedIn. And one of the things I said at the beginning is that my LinkedIn training covers three things. And I kind of got through the first thing it covers, and I did kind of circle back and mention the second thing, but I never really got to the third thing. Quick aside, the three things that I cover in LinkedIn training are profile best practices, using LinkedIn on a regular basis, and prospecting using LinkedIn. So the meeting went really well. I got a ton of positive feedback, multiple meetings to set up for coffees and lunches afterwards, and it was a great success. Except because Mike is courageous and knows me well enough to reach out and say, hey, not a big deal. He called me right after the thing and he said, not a big deal, but I thought I'd mention something, and it's something we use in the legal field as well, and it is the idea of fulfilling your verbal contracts. And when I heard this, well, first of all, he had to explain it to me, what he meant by that. He said, you were talking about the three things that you do for LinkedIn training, and you mentioned one and maybe two, but I don't think you got to a third, and I found myself distracted waiting for you to get to the third thing. So as I'm driving and listening to Mike tell me this, I'm like, he's totally right. I didn't fulfill that verbal contract, and I can see how that would be incredibly distracting. Like, why don't you just say, here are the three things I cover in LinkedIn training, 1, 2, 3, and describe them, and then maybe go into the rabbit holes or some detail about each of them so that people aren't waiting to know what the three things are. And you can apply this to a simple thing of just one thing that you say. If you say, I'm going to send an email after our meeting, and you don't, that's the thing you need to deliver on. Make sure you send the email. I've literally sat in a coffee meeting and told someone, I'm going to send you an email after this doing so-and-so. And I'll say, I'm pulling out my phone so I can email myself as a reminder to do that. Give me just a second, blah, 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 send. And then we continue the conversation. So that's something I've taken to heart. And actually, it's been a couple weeks since that happened. And I've used that at a couple of times. And I can tell it's much more professional and definitely is clearer when you say, I'm going to cover these three things and list the three things that you cover. Back to Mike's story in the legal firm about that, the reason that he pays so much close attention to the verbal contracts is that when opposing counsel is saying, here are the three things that we're going to prove in this case today, Mike is making notes. Here's point 1 that they say they're going to prove. Point 2, they're going to prove. Point 3, they're going to prove. And then when he cross-examines and talks to the jury at the end, he said, opposing counsel promised they were going to prove these three things, and they never even talked about point 2, and they didn't prove point 3 for a reasonable doubt and all this stuff. I'm like, that is brilliant. I totally get it. So he's watching that like a hawk, which is one of the reasons he caught me in doing that. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate him pointing that out. It's one of those things where it really helps somebody, but it's not necessarily a happy thing. And I think it's important to be courageous and tell people, hey, this might improve your presentation, or hey, maybe say this differently, or things like that. But the rest of the presentation was awesome, right? And Mike led with that. He's like, it was fantastic, but here's one thing to think about. So today I wanted to just do a quick thing. This could have been a marketing or a brain food, but I just wanted to talk about that idea of fulfilling your verbal contracts. So if you think about that and pay attention to that over the next couple weeks, if you see yourself or think about yourself saying, hey, I'm going to do these three things, make sure you do the three things. And even better, at the very beginning, before you go down the path of any one of those things, list the three things that you're going to cover. And you might even write it down on a chalkboard or a whiteboard or whatever you're doing, So you have your roadmap of promises that you've made. And I'm actually going to start doing that when I'm doing Zoom calls and training and things like that. If I say, I'm going to show you how to do Google hidden searches for PDF documents or whatever, I'm going to make a note, like the little things that I've promised, so that I get back to it and don't forget to fulfill the verbal contract. If this resonates with you, I'd love to hear in the comments below. If you've struggled with that in the past, or if it's something like a aha moment like I just had, I would love to hear from you about that. Or if you have another good example on fulfilling the verbal contract. The word for this week's video is watches. So we all love watches. Got a Garmin watch, all that stuff. So watches. If you watched the entire video, throw me a watch in the comments. I really appreciate you guys tuning in to watch, and I hope the idea of verbal contracts was helpful this week. I'll see you next time.